Well, hello there, folks. By now, you should be started in the course. Should have worked your way through most of the introductory material and have probably started into some of the assignments. And I have probably referred you to the punctuation pattern sheet, telling you, hey, if you pay attention to what the punctuation pattern sheet is showing you, you might just be able to figure out how to punctuate some of your sentences a little more correctly than what you're doing right now. I know that the punctuation pattern sheet is something that I used when I first started about a bazillion years ago. Two old men were sitting in the writing lab at Spokane Falls Community College in Spokane, Washington, and one of the old men said, "Have you seen this punctuation pattern sheet before?" And I said, "No." And he commenced to tell me all about it, as I'm about to do with you. And I would say that it helped me quite a bit. Also eventually allowed me to understand more complex grammar and style issues. So we have grammar, how you use your words, and then we have style. How you use your words and how you use mechanics when you're writing. So we're going to focus in on the mechanics side of that. So let me share my screen with you. There we go. You can see I have some more meaningless stuff up there. We're going to go to the course. We're in the 102 course here. If I'm using this video for the 101 class, it's the same process. It's just that you're 101 students and not 102 students, right? Not rocket science there. Okay. Down here, I've just created a new module. It's called Punctuation. It follows the introductory material. Inside the punctuation module at this point is a punctuation pattern sheet. I may eventually put some more stuff in there. But for right now, this is all I have. When you click on it, it's going to come up in here. I don't want you to do that. I want you to go ahead and have it come up as a Word document. So you click on the link there. All right. Now, I don't need you guys to edit, but I'm going to click off the editing so that we don't have to look at it repeatedly. This is a punctuation pattern sheet. This shows you some basic structures that we can say, you know, here's how you punctuate them. It gets a lot more complicated than this, but these basic structures will get you started. And in fact, they're going to probably make up quite a chunk of the sentences that you're using right now. You can combine these together. So you could actually combine 4 and 6 together, right? There's ways of doing that. So if you get that picture, then you can see you have, you know, these 8 different patterns, and you can combine them in a variety of ways. And my guess is that this gives us quite a few different variations. I'd have to figure out 8 times 8 times 8 to whatever, you know. Okay, so we want to start with this idea of an independent clause. An independent clause is the foundational sentence. It's the basic sentence as far as we're concerned for this class. There are some variations on that, but for our class, an independent clause is the smallest chunk of words, the smallest structure of words that can stand alone as a sentence for us. So how do you identify an independent clause? Well, let me show you. An independent clause has 2 parts to it. It has a subject noun phrase and a verb phrase. We can identify the subject noun phrase using what's called a who what test. It's a pronoun identification test for those of you who are into it. All right, so who picked her nose? Oops, sorry. Who picked her nose? And our subject noun phrase is Tara, right? To get a verb phrase, many times, not all the time, sometimes you just have to sort of figure out what you're looking for. But a lot of times to get a verb phrase, we can use what's called a do-did test. So what did Tara do? And the answer is picked her nose. If a group of words passes those two tests and no more, right? You can identify those two structures, what we call a subject noun phrase and a verb phrase, then you have an independent clause, right? We can identify this structurally. That's a structural identification. You know, it has an answer to a who what test. Who picked her nose? The answer is Tara. And it has an answer to a do did test or some other way of identifying the verb phrase, which is, just for those of you who are wondering, I don't want to get you lost, the verb plus whatever else follows. We'll just keep it simple for right now. All right. So structurally, we can see those two phrases in here. And it's the same with any one of these that has an independent clause in it. Who felt gassy? Well, the answer is I did. And we can see over here that independent clause that follows the comma, right, is right there. What did I do? And the answer is felt gassy. So we see a subject noun phrase and we see a verb phrase. All of these independent clauses will have those structures. Okay. So an independent clause is the smallest grammatical unit that we are concerned about that can function as a sentence, that can stand alone as a sentence. And what we're going to do is we're going to use what I want to call hinge structures to hook those independent clauses together to create more complex sentences. Or what we can do with some of these structures is over here, we can put words in front of them to create dependent structures that must stick with complete independent clauses, right? And I'll get to that in a minute. All right, so we have a structural test, but let's do something that's a little easier. We can put I realize in front of a group of words, and we can hear whether or not it makes sense. It's part of our internal grammar for native speakers. For if you're a non-native, if you're a non-English speaker, or if that's not your first language, then this might not work for you. You might be stuck using the structural test all of the time. But right, these two meaning tests, these two semantic tests or internal grammar tests will help the vast majority of us, I think. So we can put I realize in front of this group of words and it will make sense. I realize because Tara picked her nose. We can also turn it into I realize Tara picked her nose. Sorry, not I realize because. I realize Tara picked her nose. If I put because in front of it, it doesn't make sense. I realize because Tara picked her nose, that doesn't make sense. That's my point with this. We can also turn it into a yes/no question. Did Tara pick her nose? We just put the tense with the did, which is with the do. Did Tara pick her nose, right? So it passes both of those tests. That will help us see that we have an independent structure. Look what happens if I do it here. Watch this. I realize I ate beans. It makes sense, right? Now, how about this? I realize after I ate the beans. Now it's not making sense. I mean, you might think, well, it kind of sort of makes sense. Don't do that. It doesn't make sense. Let's try and change it into a yes/no questions, right? If I just use the independent clause here, we see this subject noun phrase and the verb phrase. If I just say, did I eat the beans? I can turn that into a yes/no question. But what happens when I put after in front of it? Did after I eat the beans? Doesn't make sense, right? So it doesn't pass either of those tests when I put after in front of this group of words. So what we're learning is that we don't have a structure that can stand alone. That's what we're learning here. Okay. So let's start hooking these things together with these different hinge structures. This is a colon, right? You can also use a semicolon here. Tara picked her nose, she ate her boogers. Whatever follows the colon, when we hook two independent clauses together with a colon, the rule is this, that the content that follows this colon has to be a necessary consequence of the preceding information. So, in this particular case, Tara is saying that eating her boogers is a necessary consequence of picking her nose. Now I have to go get my water for my tea here, so just hang on a second. And that's what I get for starting a lecture when I thought maybe I would also have some tea. Multitasking, it's not something I do. Okay, let's go back to this. So the content, right, the clause or the sentence that follows a colon must be a necessary consequence of the preceding information. For Tara, eating her boogers is a necessary consequence of picking her nose. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not the way it is for me, right? I would have written this. This way. I would have said, Tara picked her nose, blood oozed down her pinky, because a bloody nose, right, would be a necessary consequence of picking your nose. Now, I don't know that firsthand, but for those of you who do, I think you can testify that in fact that blood oozing down your finger would be a necessary consequence of picking your nose. Again, I have no idea about that. I've only heard. All right, so let's get back to this. Here we have what are called coordinating conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. You might have heard of them as the fanboys. We can hook two independent clauses together, right, with the hinge structure, comma, coordinating conjunction. So it's independent clause, hinge structure, comma, coordinating conjunction, independent clause. In order to use these, you need to find out what these 7 coordinating conjunctions mean. You need to look up the definitions of these words, right? So is therefore, yet is the same as but, of, just pretty complicated, nor, pretty complicated, and in addition to, for, because. I'll let you figure out yet and nor on your own. You can look those two up. I'm sorry, of and nor on your own. Okay, so let's look up here. Tara picked her nose. She was hungry. We want to hook those two together. Boy, Tara is a real trip. Tara picked her nose. Oh, I see. For must mean because, right? Do you see how that would work? Tara picked her nose because she was hungry, right? So for and because are the same thing. So what's nor? What do you think nor is? You guys figure that out. Okay. Tara picked her nose, comma, for, there's the hinge structure. She was hungry. Let's put another independent clause together. So we have these two independent clauses, right? Just like over here. This is the flow of structure. This is the flow of structure joined with the flow of meaning, right? We understand what's going on, but we can see that within what we understand that there's this structural unit, and the structural unit is independent clause, hinge structure is comma coordinating conjunction, just like it is over here, right? These patterns are patterns that you can use. I went to the store for I was hungry. We ought to probably be a little worried about what Tara was hungry for when she was picking her nose, but right, grossness aside, grotnas aside, I'm just going to go ahead and say, you can see how you can hook these independent clauses together if you're using the correct hinge with the correct meaning. Okay, now down here, remember how up here we use this we could use a semicolon or a colon? Well, that's going to come into play down here. We're going to use this semicolon instead of a colon, and the hinge structure is semicolon conjunctive adverb. It's a conjunctive adverb, and then a comma. I'm not going to worry you about what a conjunctive adverb is. There was a time when I taught students what all of these things were. I'm just going to try to get you to see the patterns for right now. So we can use our yes, no question test. Do I not like snot? Right? Do I like boogers? right? We can turn it into yes, no questions. I realize I don't like snot. I realize I do not like boogers, right? Okay. So, I realize I do like boogers. Boy, it sounds really gross reading these things off. I'm telling you, Tara was a student who came through the class 18 years ago, something like that, maybe 17 years ago. And she came up with all of these sentences, and I've been using it ever since. Students used to make their own punctuation pattern sheets based on one that I would give them. And Tara came up with this, and it was just absolutely wonderful. And then she dropped out of the class. Absolutely brilliant human being. Sometimes brilliant people don't make it through school the first time. My dad used to say the best students drop out at least once, right? So what we have here is this independent clause right here hooked together with this independent clause right over here. See, independent clause hooked together with an independent clause. Here's the hinge structure. However, is kind of like saying on the other hand, or despite that. So I don't like snot. On the other hand, I do like boogers. It's however has that kind of semantic meaning to it. So I don't like snot, semicolon, that's actually hooking. This is a whole sentence right there. It's hooking that sentence together. And then the however gets the comma after it because it's an adverb starting a sentence. I'm not going to worry you too much about that. I'm just going to tell you that the sentence is actually this independent clause hooked together with a semicolon to this whole sentence right there that begins with however, right? But the hinge structure looks like that. It looks like semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma. And it's the same for all of these conjunctive adverbs, and you can look them up online. All right. But, you can see that these all have the same pattern, and that you can create a long sentence from shorter structures that could stand alone as sentences, right? All right. A mid-sentence modifier, Tara, the girl next door, right? If you're going to do that, Tara, the girl next door, forgot to take the trash out. It's a repetition of the noun, right? So Tara and Tara, it's just saying Tara forgot to take her trash out. When you do that, right, you need to use commas in that particular case. We can turn an independent clause into what is called a dependent clause. A dependent clause is composed of a subordinating conjunction, a subordinator, plus an independent clause. So this structure here, right, is the same as dependent clause. They're the same thing. It's just that this is saying what a dependent clause is composed of. So if we, as we discovered earlier, if we take I ate the beans and I felt gassy, and we want to hook them together in a way that has a subordinate idea, right? Then we can put a subordinating conjunction in front of it, and we can hook them together. But if the subordinate structure, in this case, it's called a subordinate clause because it starts with a subordinate conjunction. This subordinate clause cannot stand alone. It would be a violation of all things proper if it did. So we have to hook it up with an independent structure of some kind, in this case, an independent clause. The hinge structure, when the dependent clause starts the sentence, is that a comma must follow the dependent structure. That's because it's an adverb, generally speaking, but don't let that confuse you. Just recognize the dependent clause. If you have that dependent clause or some other kind of dependent structure preceding the independent clause, you'll have a comma in front of it most of the time, right? So that's dependent clause first, independent clause second. Well, what happens when we put the dependent clause after the independent clause? Well, when we do that, then we don't have commas unless, you guys ready for this? Unless what follows is a contradiction of some sort. That's the general pattern for that. So you will see that for the most part, all of these subordinate dependent clauses that are following independent clauses, that most often it won't have a comma. So if you have this structure and you don't put a comma there, you're going to be right most of the time. Yeah. Even though, although, and though are 3 times that you would use a comma. Now, I didn't do though down here. I didn't include one with though because I have though in, at least involved word-wise in both of those examples. So although, even though, and though are 3 times where you will use a comma if the dependent clause comes after the independent clause, right? Take a deep breath. It's not particularly complicated. You guys make these structures all the time when you're talking and when you're writing. You just need to learn to see them so that you can punctuate them correctly. That's what it boils down to. All right. One last structure. You can have an independent clause with a colon and then a list of items. So I like many colors is your independent clause. You guys remember the 3 tests for an independent clause? We have a structural test, and then we have 2 internal grammar tests. Yeah. You remember what the structural test is? What are the 2 parts that it has to have? A subject noun phrase, and then it has to have the other structure is a verb phrase. A verb phrase. So we use the do-did test to identify the subject noun phrase. We use a who-what test to identify the subject noun phrase. Who likes many colors? The answer is I. And then what do I do? Well, it sort of works, like many colors. That gives you the verb phrase. But we can turn it into a yes/no question. Do I like many colors? Right. So we can see the structure here. We can see the subject noun phrase and we can see the verb phrase, even though we have to strain a little bit on our test for the verb phrase. But that noted, if we put I realize in front of it, these 2 internal grammar tests that I'm trying to teach you about, I realize I like many colors. Do I like many colors? It passes both of those tests. So it's an independent structure of some kind. Putting a colon after it and creating a list, something we can do, right? I like many colors, blue, green, and red. You could even have sentences here hooked together with semicolons, right? All right. Now we have error types. These are these sentences get you into trouble. These are errors that many people can see. And when you make these errors, people say, oh, tisk, 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 you've made an error. You aren't a quality human being. You're obviously not college educated if you make this error. I know quite a few college educated people who make these kinds of errors all the time. But let me show them to you. All right. A fragment, right, is a group of words that is a non-sentence. Sort of matches nonsense, right? It doesn't make sense. It's a non-sentence. So if I just say, after I ate the beans, well, that's not going to work as a sentence. It can't stand alone. I call you up in the middle of the night. Hello. First off, it's your teacher and you think it's kind of weird, but let's get past that, right? Hey, how you doing? Oh, you're doing okay, huh? After I ate the beans. You're going to be like, oh, I don't even understand that, right? It doesn't even make sense. So, that's one test to see this. We can do a structural test, right? We can see that we have this subordinating conjunction. I've shown you this subordinating conjunction twice now, here in pattern number 7 and here in pattern number 6. You know that that's a subordinating conjunction of some sort. So whatever follows it has to be subordinate to something else. It can't stand by itself, right? Because you could have like after eating the beans, that wouldn't be an independent clause following the subordinating conjunction, but it would still be subordinate. So here, after I ate the beans, we see that we have the subordinating conjunction we see that we have the subject noun phrase, and we see that we have a verb phrase. So we have, we have this structure right here. We have a dependent clause. We have this structure right here. It's a dependent clause composed of a subordinated conjunction and an independent clause. We can do the flow of structure test with this, right? That's the one that you want to learn how to do. We can also see that I can use I realize in front of this. I realize I ate the beans. I can turn it into a yes, no question. Did I eat the beans? So we can see that that part of the sentence is an independent clause, an independent structure of some sort anyway. Once we attach this, now let's do the test. I realize after I ate the beans. No, it's not going to work. Did after I eat the beans? That's not going to work either. It won't, we can see that this structure won't stand alone. It cannot be punctuated with a period. If you do, you have what's called a fragment. The editorial mark for fragment is frag, dirty, rotten frag. You need to search through your writing and destroy these fragments. Can you use fragments in writing? Yeah, but why wouldn't you just punctuate the sentence correctly? You know what I'm saying? Just demonstrate that you know how to do it. That's what your readers are looking for. They're looking for you to be able to demonstrate your versatility, to demonstrate your knowledge. That's how it is to be a scholar in general. All right. Another thing we can do is we can hook independent clauses together in a way that doesn't have a full hinge structure. If you just use a comma to hook independent clauses together, you're creating what's called a comma splice. Right? That is a comma splice. None of these patterns, say, hey, go ahead and just use a comma. It doesn't work. Now, if you try to solve that problem by removing the comma, then you get what's called a fused sentence because you're hooking two independent clauses together with no hinge at all, with no structure at all, right? So here's three error types that I'll be pointing out in your writing. If I tell you you have a frag, or I tell you have a comma splice or a fused sentence, if I say something like that, these are the structures you're looking for. I will probably also do some other structures, but these will be the three main error patterns that I'm trying to find in your writing at this point. So that's the punctuation pattern sheet. It's once you get used to using it, once you get used to looking for those patterns in your writing, it's not particularly difficult. I would suggest using that punctuation pattern sheet when you're working with tutors and saying, so if the tutor says I have a comma splice, you can say, oh, well, I know what that is because it's on my punctuation pattern sheet, right? If the tutor says you need a comma and a coordinating conjunction here because you're hooking together two independent structures with and, right? You need to add a comma to that. Then, the tutor can show you the structures that you're using, or you can look them up. I will be referencing the punctuation pattern sheet quite a bit. Like I'll say, look at punctuation pattern number 3. Now compare this sentence, and I'll give you a sentence from your writing to that punctuation pattern number 3, and tell me where the comma should go. I mean, I'll be writing that quite a few times over the course of this semester. So you want to be able to know where the punctuation pattern sheet is. You want to be able to know what the structures are. And now you know basically how to use that punctuation pattern sheet. If you have questions, of course, you just send me an inbox message and I'll give you a hand, or you can call my Google number and I'll walk you through it. I know I've given you a lot in a short amount of time, but that's what my teachers did for me. And eventually I figured out how to use it. So I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to do the same thing. You're a perfectly intelligent human being. And I trust that you can do this. All right. You can do this. I will have additional video lectures when I get around to creating them. Have a great day or great evening, whatever time it is.